Let's go ahead and create that volume. Let's drop down an ISO offset. And in the first input, we have the source. So let's drop our DOP import into there. We set output type to ISO surface. And let's change the uniform sampling into 150. And if we visualize it, we should get the buildings off the city block as a volume. There you go. And now we can actually detect which one of the new ones fits inside it. And if buildings that we're laying over fit inside other buildings that already exist, they won't make it into the selection. Let's copy a few nodes from up. Let's get these three nodes, unpack, resample, and fuse. Control C, Control V, underneath the transform. Let's disconnect this, move these two to the top, and plug it into the unpack. Let's visualize fuse, and now we're going to lay down a group node. Let's quickly run down our chain. If we look at our transform, that is just our city block a bit moved, so we can actually cheat a building into fitting in. If we unpack them, we should, if we visualize the points, get points on every corner. We can then resample those edges as we've done before, and if we fuse them, we make sure that all of these buildings actually belong to the same item. We can then wire this fuse into the first input of the group node and the ISO offset into the second. Let's also move it down a little bit, and then we can visualize group 1. Let's turn the entity to points, and in the number tab, turn off enable, and in bounding, we enable this, and the bounding type drop-down menu, we're going to set to bounding object points only. And that makes sure that we're using the ISO volume as a detector. Let's call the group intersecting points, group intersecting points, and scroll up a bit. In the group name, we can just hit $OS again, and that should give it the name of the actual group. If we middle mouse, we can check that works. It does. Let's drop down another group node. We can call that group underscore intersecting buildings, like so, and we wire the first group into the second. Let's visualize it. In group name $OS, same as the other one, set the entity to points again, number enable turned off, and in edges we turn it on, and then we set the edge depth to 1,000,000. And then here in point group, we have to define the group that we're piping in, so group intersecting points, and make sure that 0 is removed, so we only want group intersecting points, like so. Let's check that's working. In our viewport, let's hover over the middle somewhat, turn off the point visualizer, and if we then click on the group intersecting buildings node, we can see that we have a number of points being highlighted. So that is working. What we can do now is put down another blast node, and we can blast away group intersecting buildings. Should be all the way at the bottom of the line. There we go, and now we can see that we're blasting away all the buildings that are in the center. Let's template view the blast one node and actually visualize the DOP import, like so. And now we can see that we have made a selection of buildings. We can see that this one in the center actually made it in, and we can see that wherever else we have buildings intersecting with the overlaid cluster, they're actually removed. But we can also see that we have a few detectors failing, so these three buildings here should not be in. That is probably because our detection is not precise enough, so let's fix that as well. If we look closer, we can see why. Because we're using these smaller buildings as detectors and turning them into an ISO offset, they should actually overlay with the edges that we're trying to detect, but you can see that the boxes of these actually fit entirely inside and do not touch any of the edges of the buildings we're overlaying. So we'll just have to increase the size of these ISO services. That's those. And all we can do is simply add a transform node and stick it underneath the ISO offset. Let's have a look at the ISO offset node first and go to the construction tab. Make sure that laser scan is turned off. I noticed that turned off makes a lot cleaner result than when it's turned on. Back on the transform node, let's just set the scale in Y to 2. That should scale up all these buildings. But we also want them to sink down a little bit. So let's get this channel, copy parameter, and in translate, let's say paste relative references, divide it by 2, and minus that. And now if we change the scale more, we should see that they extrude both up and down. Now I want them to be able to detect the bottom of the buildings we're overlaying, or the top, and you can see that the buildings that we just had before are now gone, and that's because this longer ISO surface is now properly intersecting with the bottom lines instead of sitting in the middle. So it's now detecting those buildings and removing them successfully. So we've now checked the new buildings against the buildings that are already present. The next step is to check the new buildings against the shape of the city block, and we'll do that in the next clip.